Rising from the shores of the Bosphorus like a crown between continents, Constantinople was more than a city. It was legend made stone. Founded by Constantine the Great in 330 AD, it was christened as the New Rome, a beacon of power that would outlive its namesake by 1,000 years. But this title, New Rome, sparked a centuries-long question. Who truly inherited the legacy of Rome? Was it the Eastern Empire that carried its laws, language, and emperors? Or was it the Latin West with its papal succession and Charlemagne's claim to a Holy Roman Empire? The Byzantines claimed to be Rome itself, not heirs, but its continuation. Their emperor bore the same title, their court the same ceremonies, their capital its imperial spirit. And for over 1,000 years, that claim stood unchallenged. Yet, the land it rose upon held mysteries far older than Constantine. Ancient traditions, passed down through the whispers of time, claim that this site once echoed with the footsteps of prophets and kings. Some spoke of it being touched by the legacy of Solomon. Others said its hills and harbours were foretold in both Eastern and Western legends. The Byzantines themselves believed the city's foundation was blessed by visions and celestial signs. And so, Constantine's act of founding the city was not merely political, it was seen as prophetic. The emperor sought not just to create a capital, but to revive the spirit of Rome in a place already charged with sacred history. For emperors, it was a throne. For armies, a prize. And for faiths, a battleground of divine right. Its walls, the mightiest of their age, stood as a challenge to conquerors. Its domes and spires pierced the heavens, home to orthodox rites, imperial decrees, and classical wisdom preserved, while Western Europe descended into medieval shadow. Its geography alone made it a jewel. Commanding the Bosphorus Strait, it sat at the crossroads of Asia and Europe, East and West, Islam and Christendom. Whoever held it controlled the gateway to empires. By the mid-15th century, the city's past glory had dimmed, but its symbolic power had not. Constantinople still stood as the last flicker of the Roman world, guarded fiercely and coveted widely. And on its horizon, a new star was rising from the east, one that would forever change its fate. Capital of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years. It was not merely a city that the armies of Islam desired. It was a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. From the earliest days of the faith, the conquest of Constantinople loomed like a sacred promise. The prophet Muhammad is said to have declared, "Verily, you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will her leader be, and what a wonderful army will that army be." These words echoed across centuries, etched into the hearts of caliphs, sultans, and soldiers alike. But this ambition was more than military. Constantinople represented the gateway between worlds, between empires, between beliefs. To take it was to symbolically unite East and West under the banner of Islam. It was not just strategy, it was destiny. The early Muslims under the Umayyads heard the call. Their fleets reached the city's walls, and companions of the Prophet died on its shores. Among them, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who had once welcomed the Prophet into Medina, was buried near the gates. His tomb would become a spiritual rallying point for generations. As centuries passed and attempts failed, the dream never faded. Sufi mystics and scholars kept the vision alive. Among them, Akhshemseddin, a towering spiritual figure of the 15th century, interpreted the hadith not as mere metaphor, but as imminent truth. He whispered it into the ear of a young Mehmed, then a prince, later a sultan, that he was the one foretold. And so the siege of Constantinople was born not only of cannons and tactics, but of prayers, prophecy, and an enduring belief that history could be bent toward divine design. Long before Mehmed II cast his gaze upon Constantinople, the city had already felt the heat of Islamic ambition. The prophecy of its conquest had stirred empires into action, but prophecy does not always yield to the first who pursue it. In the 7th century, the Umayyads were the first to lay siege. Under Caliph Muawiyah, fleets surrounded the city between 674 and 678, launching a years-long campaign. It ended not with victory, but with bitter retreat, beaten back by Greek fire and the sheer endurance of Constantinople's walls. Another Umayyad assault came in 717, this time led by Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik. This too ended in failure, as winter and famine did what swords could not. Yet these attempts carved legends of martyrdom and sacrifice, with companions of the Prophet buried along the city's thresholds. The Abbasids showed less fervour. As the Caliphate's focus shifted east, Constantinople faded from their immediate grasp. Later, the Seljuk Turks and minor Anatolian beyliks flirted with the idea, but none could muster the might or the resolve. Even the Ottomans, for all their early vigour, fell short. Bayezid I, in his blazing campaign westward, encircled the city but never breached it. His momentum died at Ankara, where Timur shattered his armies. Murad II, too, tested the city's walls during moments of truce and opportunity, but always pulled back, restrained by politics, treaties, or divine timing. Each failure etched Constantinople deeper into Islamic memory, not as a lost goal, but as a waiting promise. Each siege, each retreat, fed the fire that would one day forge the final attempt. One last leader, one last army. In the ashes of a shattered Anatolia, one frontier tribe stirred with ambition. From the humble town of Söğüt, the Ottomans rose, first as guardians of borderlands, then as architects of empire. By the late 13th and early 14th centuries, they were just one among many Turkish beyliks scrambling for survival after the fall of the Seljuks and the shadow of Mongol rule. But unlike others, the Ottomans looked westward, toward Byzantine lands. Through cunning diplomacy, marriage alliances, and relentless campaigns, they expanded their reach. Bursa fell. Then Edirne. The Balkans were not just raided, they were settled, governed, absorbed. By the early 15th century, the Ottoman state had outgrown its roots. It was no longer a warrior band. It was a centralized powerhouse with viziers, bureaucracy, and taxation. It had outlasted its rivals and replaced old powers. But Constantinople still stood, taunting them from within their own lands. The conquest of that city would be the keystone of legitimacy. And this dream was not only state policy. It was preached in mosques, sung by dervishes, and whispered in the tents of soldiers. Sufi sheikhs spoke of divine destiny. The Ottoman banner, once a tribal standard, now carried prophecy. It was no longer a matter of if, only when, and who would lead. He was not born to follow tradition. He was born to reshape it. Mehmed, the son of Murad II, entered the world of empire not as its ruler, but as its challenge. His father, Murad II, recognized something in the boy. a restless mind and forceful will that marked him as no ordinary heir. In a move both bold and baffling to his court, Murad abdicated the throne to Mehmed when the boy was just 12 years old. Few could understand it, except perhaps the father who had glimpsed greatness early. Yet the world was not ready. Crusading forces threatened the realm, and the young sultan's grip was too green. When crisis loomed, Mehmed did not cling to pride. Instead, he sent an iconic message to his retired father. "If you are still the sultan, come and rule. But if I am the sultan, then I command you to take up your sword and rule." During his first reign, he was merely 12 years old. Yet even then, he obsessed over Constantinople. He ordered maps, questioned generals, and pressed for assaults that his advisors barely understood. It was too soon. He was too young. The throne passed back to his father, but the fire never left. When Mehmed returned as Sultan in 1451, he was no longer a boy. He had read Aristotle and the Quran, studied Alexander and the Prophet. He spoke Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Turkish. He absorbed Renaissance thought while mastering Islamic theology. He was as much a philosopher as a warrior. But above all, he was obsessed. He saw in Constantinople not just a city, but a destiny. He did not want to be just another sultan. He wanted to be the one the Prophet had foretold. His court feared his ambition. His advisors warned against provocation. But Mehmed ignored them. His mentor, Akshemseddin, a mystic scholar, whispered prophecy into his ear and reminded him the time was now. And so Mehmed prepared, not recklessly, but relentlessly. He was calm, calculating, and cold when needed. A ruler of vision, but also of ruthless clarity. He would be remembered not just as a conqueror of walls, but as a shaper of worlds. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople stood as a fading shadow of its former glory. Once the heart of an empire that spanned continents, it had become a shrinking island in an Ottoman sea. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, noble and resolute, ruled a city of hollow churches, cracked marbles, and dwindling faith. The Byzantine Empire, in truth, was no empire at all. Its territory barely extended beyond its walls. Its economy was broken, its population a fraction of what it once was, and its politics paralyzed by centuries of internal strife. Yet the city's spiritual prestige remained unbroken, still the seat of Orthodox Christianity, still a beacon to the Christian East. Constantine XI turned westward for help, to the Pope, to Venice, to Genoa. In desperation, the unthinkable was agreed, a union of the Eastern and Western churches. The price of survival was submission to Rome. But the union was bitter. Most of the city's citizens and clergy rejected it, and the West responded half-heartedly. A few ships came, a few mercenaries, and one man of legend, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a Genoese commander with iron will and 1,000 men. He would be the backbone of the city's defense. Venice and Genoa, rivals by trade and by tradition, weighed their options cautiously. They offered just enough to protect their interests, but not enough to provoke Ottoman wrath. Hungary and the northern powers watched, but acted not. As the siege neared, Constantinople found itself spiritually isolated and diplomatically betrayed. Surrounded by an empire that had outgrown it, the city stood not because of what it had, but because of what it symbolized. The last Rome, the last hope, and those who came to defend it did so not for Byzantium, but for the myth of what it once was. He was only 21, no longer a child, yet not yet a man of grey counsel. His youth was not a burden, it was a storm. In its energy lay ambition, and in its ambition, direction. Mehmed carried the fire of a prophet's promise and the discipline of a seasoned sovereign. He did not rush to war, he laid chess pieces. His first move was diplomatic silence. He sent peace signals to Hungary. He secured his flanks in the Balkans. Every possible distraction was neutralized or delayed. None would interfere when he struck. Then came the fortress, Rumeli Hisara, built in under 4 months on the narrowest point of the Bosphorus, directly across from Anadolu Hisara. It was not just a military post. It was a declaration: this strait belongs to the Ottomans now. To dominate the sea, Mehmed ordered the construction of a fleet, not merely to pressure the city from water, but to sever its artery, the Golden Horn. A massive iron chain protected the inlet, but Mehmed was already imagining ways around it. And then, the cannons. Orban, a Hungarian engineer, came to Constantinople offering his services. The Byzantines could not afford him. Mehmed could. He commissioned a bombard so vast it required hundreds of oxen to move and hours to cool between shots. Its voice would echo like divine thunder across land and sea. But Mehmed's true genius lay not in steel alone. He kept his court divided, his enemies guessing, and his allies comfortable. He struck quiet agreements with Genoese merchants in Galata, whispered promises to Christian enclaves, and sowed confusion through planted misinformation. Every step, every silence was calculated. At the center of his spiritual arsenal stood Akhshemseddin, mystic, scholar, and mirror to Mehmed's soul. While the Sultan forged cannon, Akhshemseddin forged resolve. He preached discipline and destiny, assuring the army and the Sultan alike that prophecy was not metaphor, it was imminent. The strategy was now complete. Constantinople would be struck by land and sea, surrounded, isolated, and broken from within. Not just taken, but claimed. And the world would watch the beginning of an empire on the ruins of another. April 6th, 1453. With the rising sun came the thunder of cannons, and a siege that would shake the very foundations of two worlds. The Ottomans encircled Constantinople with an army of over 80,000. Janissaries, Sipahis, engineers, sappers, and supply trains stretching for miles. They faced a crumbling empire guarded by barely 7,000 defenders, Byzantines, Genoese mercenaries, and civilian volunteers, led by Emperor Constantine XV and Giovanni Giustiniani. From the start, Mehmed's assault was relentless. The massive bombard cannons shattered the silence, hurling stone balls the size of boulders. For days, then weeks, the city's legendary Theodosian walls trembled, but the defenders proved defiant. Night after night, they climbed the rubble to reinforce breaches by torchlight. Stones, earth, and sweat holding back steel. Each breach was met with blood. Ottoman sappers tried to tunnel beneath the walls, but Greek counterminers intercepted them. Underground, battles were fought in pitch darkness. Shovels turned to swords, picks to daggers. More than once, tunnels collapsed, burying both sides. The Ottomans attempted frontal assaults, waves of irregular infantry thrown at the gates. They were repelled with arrows, boiling oil, and rocks. The Janissaries watched in silence, knowing their time would come only when the walls had bled enough. Inside the city, the mood was desperate yet dignified. Priests walked the streets singing hymns, leading processions with icons. Citizens prayed in Hagia Sophia. Constantine refused to flee. "I will not abandon my people," he declared. "To live or to die, we do so together." Then a miracle turned into terror. In one of the boldest maneuvers in siege history, Mehmed's men greased timbers and rolled ships overland, around Galata and into the Golden Horn. The Byzantines awoke to Ottoman sails inside their inner harbour. Naval superiority was gone. Giustiniani attempted a counterattack with fire ships, but the wind turned and the ships burned prematurely. In response, the Byzantines built floating barricades. Small skirmishes broke out on the waters. Ottoman archers rained arrows from their decks. Greek fire was launched in return. Every side bled, but Constantinople was now choking, its lifeline cut from within. Still, the Ottomans could not break through. They tried psychological warfare, firing messages into the city offering mercy for surrender. Constantine tore them down. He sent none back. Weeks passed. Supplies dwindled. Morale cracked. A lunar eclipse cast dread upon the city. Priests whispered omens of doom. Yet Constantine held firm. So did Giustiniani, despite his wounds. So did the women, children, and monks who manned the walls when soldiers collapsed. Then, on May 28th, as dusk fell, all grew quiet. Constantine ordered a final liturgy in Hagia Sophia. Soldiers confessed. The emperor knelt beside nobles and beggars alike, taking communion in silence. It would be their last night. Before dawn on May 29th, Mehmed launched his final assault. First came the Bashi bazooks, wild and poorly trained, meant to exhaust the defenders. They were slaughtered. Then came the Anatolian infantry, disciplined but unrelenting. They fought tooth and nail at breaches already crumbling. Finally came the Janissaries, silent, armoured and ruthless. At the Kirkoporta gate, a misstep. A gate left partially open became a fatal crack. The Janissaries surged in. Giustiniani was gravely wounded. Chaos broke the Byzantine lines. Constantine is said to have cast aside his purple and charged the invaders. His body was never found. In the chaos of that final charge, one moment burned itself into Ottoman legend. A soldier named Ulubatli Hassan, carrying the Ottoman flag, scaled the shattered walls under a hail of arrows. Struck again and again, he pressed forward. Wounded fatally, he drove the banner into the ramparts before falling. His blood marked the stone. His standard marked the conquest. He became a symbol, not just of bravery, but of belief, immortalized in the memory of an empire. As his banner flew above one of the main towers, a wave of fury and euphoria swept through the Ottoman lines. Soldiers, seeing the flag raised high through smoke and chaos, surged toward that breach with renewed ferocity. What had seemed an endless wall now looked like destiny's doorway. The whole army tore into the city's last defences, driven by the image of one man's sacrifice blazing above them. By mid-morning, the city was overrun. Mehmed entered in silence. He forbade looting of key churches. He rode to Hagia Sophia, now echoing with fear and prayer, and performed 2 rakats of gratitude. The city of Constantine had fallen. From its ashes, the empire of the Ottomans was born, and the world, for better or worse, would never be the same. The dust had not yet settled when a new era began. As Mehmed stood beneath the dome of Hagia Sophia, now converted into a mosque, the enormity of what had occurred echoed around the world. The last remnant of the Roman Empire was gone. A city that had withstood over 1,000 years of siege and ambition had finally fallen, not by slow decay, but by sword and strategy. But what came next? was not ruin. It was rebirth. Mehmed, now known as Fatih, the Conqueror, declared Constantinople the capital of the Ottoman Empire. He did not raise the city, he revived it. He encouraged migration from across the empire. Churches became mosques, yes, but others were preserved. Markets reopened. Streets buzzed with builders, merchants, and scholars. Within months, the city began to breathe again. He invited Orthodox clergy to remain, appointing a new patriarch to ensure continuity of faith under Islamic rule. The conquest was political, but it was also cultural, philosophical, and imperial. He envisioned not merely a Muslim capital, but a global one where East and West converged. In Europe, the shockwaves were immediate. The fall of Constantinople marked not just the end of Byzantium, but the end of an age. Renaissance scholars, having fled the East, carried with them texts, language, and ideas that would ignite intellectual revolutions in Italy, France, and beyond. For Christendom, the loss was existential. The Pope called for renewed crusades, though none would reach the city again. Walls were raised across Christendom, not just of stone, but of fear. The Ottomans were no longer a rising threat. They were the empire to contend with. For the Islamic world, Mehmed's conquest was seen as the fulfillment of divine prophecy. He was hailed not only as a ruler, but as a restorer of Islamic destiny. From the mosques of Cairo to the bazaars of Samarkand, the name Istanbul began to replace Constantinople in prayers and maps. And yet, one consequence ran deeper than empire or city: legitimacy. For decades, rival Turkic and Mongol dynasties looked down on the Ottomans. Despite their victories, Ottoman sultans were often dismissed as upstarts, sons of concubines, born outside the noble lineages that anchored tradition in the Islamic and steppe worlds. Their rise, while undeniable, was whispered about with skepticism in distant courts. But the conquest of Constantinople silenced all that. In one act, Mehmed did what no sultan, khan, or caliph had done. He took the queen of cities. He fulfilled prophecy. He became Sultan of Sultans. And the stain of half-born lineage, so often used to belittle his dynasty, vanished in the light of victory. From that moment forward, no other Turkic or Islamic dynasty could rival the stature of the Ottomans. The conquest crowned them not just with territory, but with authority, both spiritual and imperial. The House of Osman emerged as the unchallenged heir to the legacy of Rome and the mission of Islam. The old scorn was gone. Supremacy was no longer debated. It was sealed in stone and blood. And in the centuries that followed, the city would grow into an imperial jewel, the heart of an empire spanning 3 continents. The conquest did not end a story. It began a new one told in marble and minaret, in poetry and politics, in shadow and splendor. And it all began with a boy who dreamed of an ancient city and believed he was born to claim it.